This week on today's Homeowner, we're taking the lid off some great painting tips. At some point, all of us are going to have to pick up a paintbrush, so why not do it the right way? We're about to show you how to paint like a pro. Over the years, I've seen and heard hundreds and hundreds of homeowners talk about wanting to do all or part of a renovation project themselves. You won't be surprised when I tell you that most of the time, that never pans out. Lots of stuff gets in the way. Lack of time, lack of tools, lack of skill, and sometimes lack of patience. But there's one chore that homeowners do seem to follow through on, and that's painting. Just makes sense. You know, the tools really aren't that expensive or hard to come by, and the basic skills necessary to use them can be learned by almost anyone pretty quickly. Plus, it's paint, right? So if you mess up a little bit, you can paint right over your mistakes. Well, for the most part, that's true, but don't let anyone fool you. There is a difference between a professional paint job and the ones done by most weekend warriors. So, this week we're going to try and correct that by showing you how the pros do it so that you can get the results more like theirs. The place to start is with paint selection. Now, I'm not talking about choosing your color, that's your own personal choice. I'm talking about the type of paint you select and the sheen or the texture of the finish.
Inside, almost everyone agrees that latex paint is the way to go for walls and ceilings, but when it comes to woodwork and trim, the opinions begin to split. Most homeowners and DIYers prefer to use latex because it produces less odor and it cleans up easier than oil-based paint. At the same time, I know some old school pros who wouldn't dream of using anything but oil paint for interior moldings and trim or cabinets. That's because traditionally, oil finishes were the only way to get a hard, durable, waterproof finish. Though oil takes longer to dry, it forms a harder outer shell that stands up to nicks and scrapes. But because it does dry slowly, it continues to flow after it's applied, so brush strokes tend to disappear more easily. On the other hand, latex paints tend to resist yellowing and mildew growth better, so there was a quandary. But today there are latex enamel paints that also develop an exceptionally hard finish, so you do have a few options. The other thing to consider is the sheen of the paint. Gloss and semi-gloss paints are shiny and easily clean, but they tend to magnify flaws in the surface. On the other end of the spectrum, flat paints hide surface flaws but don't tend to deal well with cleaning or bumps and scrapes. In between, the satin, low luster, and eggshell finishes offer a good compromise with some of the benefits of each.
Once you've chosen your paint, you'll need to prepare the surface before you begin putting it on the walls or the woodwork. The first most obvious step, of course, is cleaning it. If a surface is dirty, there's no way the paint will stick as well as if it were clean. But so many people never even think about cleaning the woodwork and the walls on an inside project. You know, it's not that complicated. You just take a clean, damp cloth and you wipe off all the surface dust. And if you have any stains like those greasy fingerprints you often get on door casings, you'll need to use some mild soap and water to cut the grease. If the stain is left behind after you clean those greasy spots, you'll want to coat the area with a stain-blocking primer before you continue. The primer is also a good idea if you're painting over bright colors or, say, artwork left behind from permanent markers. If you're planning to use latex paint over trim that was previously painted with oil, you'll also need to prime the surface so that the new paint will stick properly. The question is, how do you know if the old paint is oil or latex? Well, it's really pretty simple and a very simple test where you take a cloth and some denatured alcohol, put a little on it, then you just wipe the area that you're trying to determine, and if it's latex, it'll soften and rub off on the rag. If not, it's probably oil. Prime right over it. Now, getting rid of surface flaws is another important part of paint preparation.
If you're repainting a room or a hallway like this one, chances are pretty good that you're going to have some holes to fill in that wall. You know, places where pictures were hung, maybe even some shelf brackets. Now, most everyone would agree that spackling is a good material to fill those holes, but how is where it usually breaks down. Most people just grab a putty knife, lob a little bit of spackling on there, and smooth it out. Now, if they're really diligent, they'll come back with some sandpaper and try to smooth out those bumps. The problem is that many walls have some texture to them, and between that glob of spackle and the sanding, you end up creating this flat spot right in the middle of all that texture. And once the paint goes on, it's just like this neon sign saying, "We filled a nail hole right here." So instead, while the spackle is still wet, take a damp sponge and just gently wipe off the excess spackle. All right? Now, try not to leave a depression because that's also going to be a dead giveaway. Now, for gaps where two surfaces meet like this, you're going to want to use caulk, preferably a siliconized latex. And it should clearly say on the label, paintable. Now, if it doesn't, don't use it. You'll also have to remove the excess caulk, so keep that wet sponge handy. I like to carry a bucket of water with me to keep the sponge clean and damp. Now, if you like to tape off your trim, be sure that this stuff is dry before you apply this, or you'll have an even bigger mess.
When you've got an oddly shaped object to paint, such as this vase, spray paint is definitely a way to go. But to ensure you get an even coat all the way around, invest in a Lazy Susan. You can pick up these at any hardware store or home center for $10 to $12. And what you want to do is put the vase in the middle. It doesn't have to be exactly in the center, but you don't want it wobbling around so it falls off. There you go, that's pretty good right there. And then slide it near the edge of the workbench. Now that's important because it allows you to bring the can all the way down for a nice even coating, so you don't have to turn it sideways. And then all you need to do is shake it up. Very important. Then we're going to give it a spin and spray a nice even coating. You'll see how quickly this works too. Watch this. If you need to, you can give it another spin. Okay, there you go. Now it's not absolutely perfect, but for the first coat, that's not bad. It only took a few seconds. So now most spray paint dries in 10 or 12 minutes. So wait till it's thoroughly dry. When you're ready for the second coat, just give it another spin.
This week we're sharing with you a number of tips so that you can paint like the pros. And we've already talked about interior painting and how important it is to really clean and prep those surfaces before you start applying any paint. Well, that concept is even more important on the exterior because of all of the elements you have to deal with sun and rain and snow and wind. Everything really works on those exterior paint jobs, and you can see on this house where it's really taking its toll. I mean, look at all the things that need to be done here. The repairing of the wood in the corner, a real common place for water damaged wood. You have all of the fascia board that will have to be sanded down because it's peeling all the way back to the raw wood, and you have a number of other kind of unique things on this particular house. Metal windows. At some point someone replaced a broken window pane, and when they did, they didn't use the proper glazing. They used a silicone caulk which will not hold paint, so that'll have to be removed, reglazed, as well as some other work that'll have to be done on this window before it's ready to paint. Now, another thing that they've already done here, which is a really good idea, is to keep all of your shrubs trimmed back. Not only so that it allows plenty of room to work behind it, but if the shrubs get up real high, the sun won't be able to keep everything dry. You'll end up with a lot of water damage behind it. Also, many houses will have some type of metal on the outside of the house, and if you have handrails like we have here or anything else that metal or steel, this all has to be sanded down and primed properly. If not, that rust will work its way right back through. And another thing, you gotta have a clean surface when you're painting, so a lot of pressure washing will be taking place on the outside of this house. Not only the areas that are gonna be painted, but also some of these old dirty bricks can look a lot better after a good pressure washing. So there's a lot of prep work on the outside of this house.
Since there's no point in prepping rotten wood, the first step is the removal of the water-damaged fascia boards. A careful cut is made beyond the damaged area so that the roofing can be pried up and the bad wood removed. Then new material is cut to fit and slipped into position. This new wood will have to be primed before the top coat goes on, but the next step is cleaning the entire house to remove any dirt or mildew which would prevent the new paint from forming a good bond with the old. Scraping comes next, and this can be very tedious. In fact, many pros use a rotary sander to speed up the process, but if you choose to rent or buy one, use it carefully. They're aggressive machines, and you can quickly gouge a wood surface if you lose focus. When the failed paint is gone, flaws in the wood beneath it are often revealed. Filling these in will mean a smoother finish after the final coat of paint. It's also important to fill gaps between boards with caulk on the outside, just as we did on the inside. But here, it's not just for looks. The caulk keeps out moisture, preventing wood decay. To replace the silicone caulk around the windows, the guys are using glazing putty, which can easily be painted once it's dry, unlike the silicone caulk. Prepping rusted metal usually requires a lot of elbow grease or horsepower. A wire brush attachment for a grinding tool like this one is one of the quickest ways to get the job done, and following it with a rust stabilizer will help keep the rust at bay.
When all the other prep was done, the raw wood and bare metal was all covered with a coat of primer before they put on 2 coats of finished paint. You know, the thing about primer that people often misunderstand is that it's designed primarily for one purpose: bonding. The primer bonds to the surface and the top coat bonds to it. It isn't designed to withstand the weather over time or be durable all by itself. So leaving a project at that stage for a long time isn't a very good idea at all. In fact, some manufacturers specify a limited time frame to apply the top coat. In other words, read the label and don't plan on priming and painting on weekends that are months apart. You should also be aware that there are different primers for different applications. The one we used here on all the new woodwork was different from the stain blocking interior primer we talked about earlier, and both were different from the stuff that we used on all the metal railings. So when you go shopping, tell the pro behind the paint counter what you're painting and where it is so that they can help you find the right primer for the job. By now, if you didn't already know it, you figured out there's a lot of work involved in painting, so you can use all the help you can get. And right on time, Jody has the best new product that may be part of the solution.
I think what really sets a professional painter apart from an amateur painter are the tools they use. So if you want professional results, it just makes sense to use a professional tool, right? But not all tools are about applying the paint. Sometimes it's about making the job more convenient, and that's what this tool does. This is the Handy Ladder Pail, and anyone who's tried to paint using a ladder knows how difficult it can be to go up and down that ladder while you're trying to move it, balance the paintbrush, and the rags without all of them falling off. Well, with the Handy Ladder Pail, no worries. It's specifically designed with a bracket here that will hold it to any step or extension ladder. It holds over a gallon of paint, stain, or any other liquid, and there's also an embedded magnet right here on the side, so if you're taking a break or moving the ladder, you can take your brush, attach it right there, and the brush is not going to fall either into the paint or worse, onto your carpet. It even has a built-in paint grid here if you're using paint rollers, and of course you're just not limited to your painting chores. You can use it for cleaning windows, cleaning gutters, or replacing light bulbs.
This week, we're trying to give you some tools you can use to make the next project you tackle at your house come out looking like it was done by a pro. Now, we spent a lot of time so far talking about preparation because it truly does make a big difference in the quality of a paint job. But eventually, you have to get around to put some paint on the walls, right? So where do you start? The walls or the trim?
I love to do my own painting because not only is it cost effective, it's just fun to see the success, you know, the things that you do.
We just are color people, and some people, I guess, prefer white walls. We are definitely not that family.
Usually when I start to paint, I usually cut in around the top, next to the ceiling, around any doors or windows. After that, after everything is cut in, I go back with the roller.
When we paint, if we do have to paint the trim or the baseboards, we do that second. So we get all the wall color on and then go back and clean up any little drips or messes and then tape off and paint our trim and our baseboard.
Just to see the walls be all clean and brightly finished. Just gives you a feeling that you can do it yourself.
Well, there are probably as many ways to approach this as there are people who own paintbrushes, so there's no real definite answer for every situation, but here are a few things to think about. Most painters do paint the walls first, then they'll tackle the trim. Now, there's plenty of reasons for this, but some of them revolve around the fact that they are pros. For example, most pros don't depend on any type of painter's tape to mask the line between the trim and the walls because they have the skill to quickly cut a clean line with a paintbrush free-handed. On the other hand, many do-it-yourselfers don't have that skill, so taping makes a lot of sense. If you fall into that category, the question you have to ask yourself is whether you want to put tape on a recently painted wall or recently painted trim. Now, even if you don't use tape, you might want to cover the trim first, and here's the reason. Most trim paint is gloss or semi-gloss, while walls are somewhere between flat and eggshell. If you make a mistake, and you probably will, those random drops of paint will wipe right off of a gloss or semi-gloss surface much easier than they will from a flat one. In new home construction or major renovations, the pros sometimes reverse the order because they use sprayers to cover the trim first without masking it. Then they can cut the wall paint in around it. Okay, so you have some different perspectives on how to get the painting job done. The decision-making process is up to you, but once you get it done, no matter what approach you use, you're going to have to do some cleanup. That's the part of painting everyone hates, including the professional painters. But since they do it so much, they do have a few tricks that are worth using. To start with, they minimize the mess up so that cleanup is a lot easier. The ticket there, plenty of good drop cloths. Not those lightweight plastic kind, the heavy canvas ones. The problem with the plastic, besides the fact that the lightweight stuff tears so easily, is that it doesn't absorb any of the paint. So if you have a spill, you're more likely to track it all over the house if you walk through it. An old vinyl tablecloth like this one with a felt backing is a good substitute if you don't want to spring for the real painter's drop cloths. The felt will absorb the paint and the vinyl will keep it from soaking through to the floor.
Before you move that drop cloth, be sure to fold it over onto itself so any wet paint is covered before you carry it through the house. The pros will also spend a lot of money on their paintbrushes, so it's no surprise that most of them are pretty religious about cleaning them. But whatever you pay for it, a brush will always work a lot better the next time around if it's thoroughly cleaned after each and every use. A quick dunk in a bucket of water won't get it either. It takes time with running water and mild soap. The trick is to get all of the paint out from between the bristles, and there's no way to do that with your hands, but running a wire brush through the bristles will usually do the trick. For roller covers, the pros use the curved edge on a 5-in-1 painter's tool to force out the excess paint. And you don't have to be a pro to own one of these, so it might be a good investment if you plan on painting very often.
If you've spent any amount of time looking into living green, then you've heard the term volatile organic compounds. These VOCs are gases that are emitted from things like paints, cleaners, furniture, certain shelving, and adhesives. VOCs can cause some pretty bad health issues, and unfortunately, these pollutants tend to be 2 to 5 times higher inside your home than outside. If you have to use some of these things around your home, be sure you have plenty of fresh air circulating in the room and read the instructions carefully on how to use them. Better yet, when it comes to adhesives, paints, and cleaners, look for labels that show low or zero VOCs. You'll usually pay just a little bit more for these things, but it's just a minor inconvenience for a major step toward greener living.
Painting is one of those chores that almost anyone can do, but almost no one likes to do. Still, it's one of the most common and useful home improvement projects because the right paint combination can bring a room to life with minimal investment of time and money. This week, we've been covering some painting tips to help you weekend warriors make your projects look more like the ones done by professional painters. If you start by making good decisions, do careful prep work, and exercise a little patience, you can get some pretty good results. In fact, you may even find that doing the job right makes the work go more quickly and easily.
I hope you were able to find something here this week that you can use at your homes. Hey, thanks for watching. I'm Danny Lipford. We'll see you next week.
Going green is all the rage, but can you do it on a budget? Next week, we'll show you how.
Baby doll.